Hello and welcome to All the Horrible Things, episode 56, the Pope's Exorcist, part 1.
Part 1.
What are we going to do here?
I think we're going to cover, sort of like not necessarily the history of the Exorcist genre or exorcism genre, but touch on some other films leading up to the most recent, The Pope's Exorcist, starring Russell Crowe.
Yes, which was just released like a month and a half ago, maybe. Yeah. We're a little behind the 8 ball in it, but I think now it's on VOD for people.
Yeah.
So
I would argue that that's probably where most people are going to watch it, because I don't think it did all that great in the theater.
I think you're right. Do you remember seeing a lot of like exorcisms? I know you love the religious subgenre, right? You love the spiritual.
I do.
So you would go to the cinema to see this under normal circumstances. What kept you from seeing it?
I think it was just availability. Like, I just don't think I had the time to see it, or we were preparing for something else, another podcast episode.
And there's been a lot of really fun horror releases, and I got to be honest with you, this is a subgenre that's not my favorite. I struggle with it because I do find it a bit redundant.
Sure.
And as a non-theist myself, I do not find it as scary. That doesn't mean that I haven't found some aspects of these films to really like, especially performances and special effects and such. But it's certainly not a subgenre that I seek out. I was excited about the twist on The Pope's Exorcist, which we'll talk about in part 2. But let's talk about what inspired it. Why do they keep making these movies? I'll give you a little history here. On the first kind of representation was in 1912 film From the Manager to the Cross depicts Jesus healing a demoniac because, as noted in all these films, Jesus was kind of the first exorcist. He was able to purge demons from people.
Right.
Then in 1927, you got Cecil B. DeMille's Silent The King of Kings, which opens with Jesus dramatically delivering Mary Magdalene of her 7 demons. Here representing the 7 deadly sins. And then before we hit the, ultimate exorcism, there was an Edward Demirchik 1962 biopic, The Reluctant Saint, which climaxes with a dramatic extended exorcism. But then the end-all be-all, which really kind of brought it into the forefront of people's minds, was The Exorcist. Good old Friedkin's based on the novel.
William Friedkin's book based off of Blatty. I believe his last name is Walter Blatty's hit book. And I think that's it. I think you just kind of summed up why they keep making these. I think it's because there's such a connection to religion. And I myself am not religious. And that's why I also find it kind of funny that I gravitate towards this subgenre, because it's been done so much. I mean, there were other movies that came out in the last year that are very similar to the Pope's Exorcist. I had just also watched Pray for the Devil.
You did? Okay, how was that? Because I was thinking about tackling it for this, but it got terrible reviews.
Yeah, it's not great. It's not great. And so few of them are. The thing I liked about this story was that they really focused on a female exorcist, which is not something that the Catholic Church does.
Right.
So I watched it for that angle of it alone, but I gotta tell you that almost all of these movies within this subgenre are identical. That's the problem.
Yes, and that sucks to hear, because it sounded like, okay, maybe we're going in an interesting direction with a female exorcist and kind of the politics that go on dealing with letting the woman in, but it just wasn't compelling enough. Did it just feel like this is an old kind of...
It just didn't. I mean, you would think that story angle from this point of view would have been enough, but it wasn't. It was the same... same type of story, someone who's dealt with some sort of sin in their past, which they're grappling with while also performing an exorcist. It's just done over and over. But I think that's kind of why I keep watching them, to see if someone's going to do it better, which is really interesting, and we can revisit this later in the year when Blumhouse is redoing The Exorcist. with one of our favorite directors, David Gordon Green.
Oh, yes. Okay, so he's moving on from Halloween to The Exorcist. That
To The
gives it
Exorcist.
hope. Maybe there'll be some subtle humor, because that's one thing these are kind of void of. We're also going to talk about The Right here, with Anthony Hopkins from 2011, and there's a little bit more humor in that one than The Exorcist. I feel like is void of humor entirely. Right? That is just bleak. Maybe the drunk guy at the party before Reagan comes down there and wets the carpet, but that's like the only moment that had any levity. It seemed like there was maybe going to be levity when, oh, look, Ouija board. And then you got Captain Howdy moving the cursor around, and there's trouble afoot.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting is that I think maybe some of the possession is supposed to be humorous, but it doesn't really come off that way because it's really hard to kind of bounce back and forth between really grounding an Exorcist scene and adding humor to it. Now, I think if somebody was to do it, and I think they've kind of shown that it can be done, it's just maybe a horror adjacent to this, is Sam Raimi in his Evil Dead movies, which we talked about last week.
Yes.
They're possession movies, but they're not in the Catholic, the church, they're not coming down from the Pope's approval.
It's not overtly Catholic in nature. And that's kind of what we got to mention, that this is Catholic horror more than anything, because you got to have a priest with the frock, right? Is that what the little white deal is?
I think you're right. I think you're right. I just call it the collar, the priest's collar.
And I think a lot of their authority over, say, other denominations is that they're celibate and just completely focused on it. And of course, in some of these movies we have, actually all three that we're going to talk about have these underlings, right? These secondary priests to the real exorcist, right?
Yeah.
And of course, there's going to be dalliances that are taken advantage of by the devil. But the thing is, if I was a believer, I would find this very scary. And I will say that a lot of my older relatives who are still, going to church every Sunday,
practicing
this is the scariest movie they've ever seen, and are legitimately kind of disturbed by it. You mentioned David Gordon Green's going to do an Exorcist. There was also a series. Am I crazy?
There was a series that actually was done really well, filmed right here in Chicago for Fox. Great cast, great connection to the original Exorcist movie, and I just don't think it had the numbers. And it's unfortunate because I watched it. It was really good.
I think it then boils down to, again, we have a population that is moving away from theology. I mean, especially Zennials are more often than not, when asked on any sort of forum, what's your religion, are putting none. None now is, ironically, the new worship. The nothingness, right? Which is kind of what the devil wants you to do, according to these.
He's winning.
He's winning. If you don't believe in him, this is what he wants, because then he can take advantage evermore. Tell me about your experience first watching The Exorcist.
I think it was at a friend's party. When you sort of have like the hype of it from like someone's older brother or sister, like, oh, you guys haven't seen The Exorcist? It's the scariest movie of all time. I think that depending on your beliefs, it could be, it could be one of the scariest movies of all time. There's also the great lore behind it, that it was based off of a real exorcism about a boy in St. Louis. So it was like the marketing was done for this film, and it's continued on. It's a well-made movie, and I think as a kid it scares you, and then you watch it every Halloween because it comes out on TV.
Right.
I think as a kid
it's the wonderful life of Halloween season. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think you watch it because you're like, want to be grossed out by the split pea soup, and that's it.
Yeah, I struggle with the split pea soup. I don't find that
it's not scary.
Oh, that disturbing, especially it just feels like an SNL skit, the way that it comes out so forcefully, like a stream from a hose.
Yes. Yes.
It's just like gross. It's not scary to me at all. I don't know. Right. Where's that coming from, right? At least in the Evil
Yeah.
Dead, when they're like barfing and such, it seems like their rotted innards are coming out versus like tapping
Split
into
pea
some soup restaurant. Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
not my favorite effects. That being said, I did rewatch the unrated version yesterday. Have you seen both versions?
I don't know if I ever have seen the unrated version. That's
I don't think there's that much more.
difference.
I want to say, is the crab walk down the stairs in the OG?
yes,
It is.
yes.
Okay, then I'm not exactly sure
Yeah.
how different it was.
It may have been from the time. It may have been a language thing. The certain amount of I mean, the crucifix between the legs.
Yes. Yeah, that's super graphic for sure. Yeah, it could have been that. And she says she's constantly, I mean, this is something that happens with most of these possessed characters that we're dealing with, is the whole sexual angle, fornicate with me now, or I'm going to do this to you sort of thing.
Right.
And certainly for Catholics, that's very scary because you can't have sex before marriage. And
Right.
in the right, we definitely deal with the character.
Temptation.
Yes, the temptation angle. You know what? I think I saw it as a teenager for the first time, and I think I saw it like on a TV VCR combo sort of thing. So it was a small screen, and I just couldn't get into it. It had no effect on me. I will say that I enjoyed it a lot more than I'd remembered when I watched it yesterday, simply for the actual filmmaking itself and the pacing
Yes.
of it and the performances in this. I can see why it is so revered just simply on a cinematic, like, professional lens. You know, it's so well done, and you believe everybody in it. And it almost, it has such a, part of what I don't like about these sort of films is they always seem claustrophobic, but the way that The Exorcist starts in Iraq, and you have Father Marin there, like literally in the field digging up artifacts and coming across this little icon of, I want to say the right demon here, Baal. So, but no, Pazuzu in The Exorcist is who it is. It's Pazuzu.
Right.
In Pazuzu, you see him in that big statue with one hand in the air, one hand down, and supposedly Pazuzu was a wind demon. He had the dog head, a man body, a scorpion tail, taloned feet, 2 pairs of wings, and then a snake willy, of course.
Of course.
That part of what I love about these films is that they are, you know, taking their own demons. I just wish all the ones that we're going to talk about or are talking about were more rooted in what that demon was all about. You know what I mean? They just use the names often instead of kind of harnessing the lore of that specific demon. Like,
and I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's what would, as far as storytelling goes, add so much more to it. But I think that's where somebody like James Wan took that and ran with it, with like the Conjuring universe. They're possession movies, but and that they dive deep into like the lore of the demons. And I think you nailed it. And I think that's what's missing from the Catholic ones. It's like they don't want to like give free marketing to the devil and all of his demon legion.
But interestingly, I know that there was a lot of like figureheads in the Catholic Church that were very okay with The Exorcist coming out and like thought it was good to kind of re-up faith in people. You know what I mean? So kind of like, you know, scare people into believing again, sort of thing. Which I got mixed feelings about. You know, it's kind of it's a dirty tactic, if you ask me.
I agree. It's like they just jumped on the train. They're like, "Hey, free marketing. Let's double down on this."
What else, like, about The Exorcist really sticks out to you before we move on to Anthony Hopkins' The Rite in 2011? Because you got the tropes that then are going throughout the rest. As noted, you have the younger priest who has the older one come in. I hadn't remembered that Father Marin just croaks during The Exorcist or exorcism. Completely forgot about that. And of course you have the trope of moving the demon from one body to another and then killing that body, right?
Right. Which we see in the beginning of the Pope's Exorcist, kind of.
Exactly. I mean, I think it did set the stage for all these future movies. I'm just wondering, I didn't actually look at the box office of Pope's Exorcist, but I'm assuming just did okay. That being said, I do see a lot of really positive reviews, and it is fun, which we'll talk about in a bit here.
Yeah.
Anything else about The Exorcist that you wanted to mention? Like,
No, I think it basically, they did the research, probably because they had the book to go off of, but they did a really great job of laying down all the rules that, everyone, it's like the equivalent of like a slasher movie. They're like, these are the rules. You can't have sex. You don't go off into the woods by yourself. You don't do drugs. And then from there on out, every other slasher movie went by those rules. And that's what The Exorcist did. It's, the groundwork, the blueprint.
Yeah. I do feel bad for Linda Blair because she was so typecast after that, and it's so hard once you've seen somebody lacerated up and doing these atrocious things to kind of move on from that.
Apparently she doesn't like talking about her experience on that in that film. And I don't know if it's because it's like beating the dead horse, or was it just really kind of just not the best filming like situation? It's hard to say.
And yeah, you also mentioned that it was based on a true story, and Friedkin in his documentary The Devil and Father Amorth talked about trying to hunt down that exorcist that did this in what was it, 1926 or something.
The
1940s, I think it was, actually, my bad. And that priest said, do not release this story, do not get this out into the world. He was so adamant about making sure that what happened there was just not shared with the public, which is a very different take than what you saw with the more contemporaries when it came out, which I found really interesting.
That is interesting. And I think, though, I think the problem with these movies, or like the genre, is that they're afraid of, copycats. But so like that priest, for example, probably didn't want that story getting out because there are a large amount of people who apparently fake being possessed.
Right.
And I think that's what we like. Don't share this information. People will, buy into it or pretend that they know what they're doing or talking about now. That's
You're absolutely
really
right.
Interesting.
And honestly, that to me was the scariest part of The Exorcist, when they're subjecting this poor girl to 1973 spinal taps and MRIs that just look like they were using these ridiculously antiquated machines that were doing her more harm than good. That sort of thing was scarier. And just, honestly, the scariest moment, the moment I remember the most, is the Ouija board and Captain Howdy. That's what stuck with me more than anything else. Head spinning, we see in everything, don't really care about that, the vomiting, whatever. But I don't know, subtle stuff like that, the Ouija board, or then the realistic stuff like this poor 12-year-old girl getting spinal taps in front of us and blood spurting out her neck, and I don't know.
The Ouija board is one of the main connections in the TV show that they did.
Okay.
Yeah. It was well thought out. It's a shame more people didn't watch it.
Well, let's talk about one almost, what are we talking here, 40 years later? The Rite with Anthony Hopkins. I was aware that this came out. It was, again, I love Anthony Hopkins, but it wasn't the topic that I'd want to go see at the theater. Did you feel like it brought anything new? Because again,
absolutely not.
We have the secondary priest who is questioning his faith in the same way that Father Karras is played by Jason Miller. I've never seen him. Have you seen him in anything else? The guy from The Exorcist?
I don't think so.
That guy. His performance is amazing.
He's great. He was probably the best, one of the better parts of the movie, but maybe he's just one of those actors where he's there, you just don't know.
Yeah, that's possible. But you got that same trope of he's questioning his faith. This guy's a mortician who then essentially gets school paid for by going into the seminary. And then after he goes through, it's all like, you know what? This isn't for me. I don't have enough faith. And then you got Toby Jones, his Father Matthew, coming in there like, hey, man, we paid for this. You better become a priest or we're going to put the bill on you.
Student loans.
He essentially was blackmailed by the priest.
Yes.
To then go to
cool.
exorcism school because they needed more exorcists because there's so many more, possessions going on in this horrible world. It does make sense. When the population grows, there's going to be more open to these demons. I the main guy, Michael Kovac, who's throughout the whole movie, we don't get to Anthony Hopkins for like 30 minutes, 40 minutes. He was just okay. Like, I'd never seen him before, and I haven't seen him since. Interestingly, kind of like Father Karras in Exorcist.
Yeah.
But this guy did not have that same sort of presence for me as Karras, and I wasn't as invested in his story in the least. I was salivating to get to Anthony Hopkins. But they tease you because you do get Toby Jones for a little bit, who's always good. And then when he's sent to exorcism school, you get Kieran Hines, who's an amazing Irish actor.
Yeah.
But you don't get enough of these
Game of Thrones.
You know?
No. You get these weird flashbacks with his father, played by Rutger Hauer, who I really thought, I mean, I was a huge fan. I mean, I'm still a fan of his work, rest in peace. But Rutger Hauer has such a similar look to Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah.
Don't you find that?
Yeah. I agree. That was some strange casting because Rutger Hauer didn't look anything like this priest Kovac.
No.
At all. It was weird casting, but Rutger Hauer is always fun too. I did want to mention though, we got Exorcist, Father Karras as the boxer, and then this guy's boxing too in the right.
Yeah.
So I think it was clearly like an homage, and they were aware that they were retreading some territory, so they maybe embraced it, sort of thing.
Yeah. There's almost probably supposed to be like homages to like the original, but like if everybody does it, it doesn't feel fresh. And I kind of feel like they screwed themselves by trying to do that stuff.
I think you're right. I think they needed to take a completely new approach, and they really didn't. And I felt like a lot of it was predictable. You got our kind of main possessed character, Rosaria here, who spits out nails. I guess that's a reference to, you know, the Holy Cross, the
three
Trinity.
nails. Yeah.
But again, okay, what I found interesting about this one is Regan versus Rosario, right? Regan from The Exorcist is completely enveloped at some point. We don't get any taste of Regan anymore. She's trapped in there. You see the raised skin saying, "Help me." She can't come out. She doesn't have flashes of Regan after a certain point. But it seems like this Rosaria character does go in and out of herself. And the demon only comes out when you start to do the exorcism, which is certainly more in line with how they actually do it. When, you know, Catholic priests like Father Amort, who we'll talk about, you know, Pope's Exorcist is based on a real exorcist priest called Father Amort. It was more realistic, I guess, in the process in which they did try to exorcise the character. So at least I appreciated that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's as, I mean, I appreciate that it's supposed to be more like in line with things, but I just don't know if it's as entertaining.
Yeah. No, I mean, I will say at first I was excited because I thought maybe the Rite was going to be better than the Pope's Exorcist, and that it had a good momentum in the beginning, I felt like, but then it just got really flat and
I agree.
Repetitive.
I agree. There's just, and like you're setting up this story that is supposed to be like the entertaining part of this movie, is that you go see Anthony Hopkins, he's going to show you how it's done. But then I feel like there should have been more cases. He should have been doing more day-to-day, you know, Tuesdays with Maury type of a thing. Like, let's spend the day together. And I think they missed a lot of opportunities, and this movie felt too long, and they didn't cover what they needed to.
I agree. I will say that they had some fun lines, some effective lines I felt that were often delivered by Anthony Hopkins. For example, this was the underling that said this. So proof of the devil is somehow proof. I'm sorry, I'm getting it wrong. So no proof of the devil is somehow proof of the devil.
Yeah.
I like that line from that kid. And then Anthony Hopkins, all not believing in the devil won't save you from him. Some decent lines in it, but it was just not fresh enough. Of course, we're kind of burying the lead in that Anthony Hopkins fails with the exorcism of this woman who's pregnant with an incest baby. Ultimately, she dies, and then this demon gets into him, and he's spitting up nails suddenly too. And now you got to get this underling priest to free him of it. I mean,
I think we can cover more of that in part 2 here because I think that there's a lot of comparisons to the Pope's Exorcist as far as that goes.
Yes, I completely agree.
You're going to have to stick around for part 2.
Indeed. That was the little prequel to talking about the actual Pope's Exorcist, which came out this year. I hope you liked a little history there. But
a little history, and then hopefully you have seen Pope's Exorcist before listening to this next episode because we're going to, really dive into it.
Yes, and in the meantime, stay alive.